morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Jeff Hunt. I'm the director of the Texas Military Forces Museum. I'd like to welcome you to what we call Close Assault 1944. This is a program we do every Veterans Day weekend and every Memorial Day weekend to help us remember what that holiday is really all about. And we do that by focusing on a particularly bright chapter in the long and storied history of the Texas Military Forces, and that is the story of the 36th Infantry Division of the Texas National Guard and the European theater of World War II. 36th Infantry Division was created in July of 1917 upon America's entry into the First World War. It saw 42 days of combat on the Western Front and helped occupy Germany after their surrender in World War I. 1919, the division was sent back to the United States and it was demobilized. World War I, the 36th was made up of men from both the Texas and Oklahoma National Guard. Thus, the symbolism of our shoulder patch, a blue arrowhead representing Oklahoma, which before statehood was known as the Indian Territory, with a T for Texas superimposed on top of it. After demobilization following the First World War, however, the 36th Infantry Division became an all-Texas National Guard outfit. And in 1940, it was mobilized again when President Franklin Roosevelt declared a state of national emergency following the German conquest of Western Europe that spring and summer. 36th Infantry Division would go on to fight in the Italian and Central European theaters of World War II. On September 9th of 1943, it spearheaded the invasion of Italy on the beaches of Salerno, and thus became the first American division to set foot on the soil of Europe. 36 fought its way up the bloody boot of Italy, has seen very significant engagements and significant casualties at places like Salerno, the Rapido River. In May of 1944, it was brought to the Anzio beachhead, where it helped to lead the breakout from Anzio, and it became the first Allied division to enter the Italian capital of Rome on June 4th of 1944. After chasing the Germans north from Rome for 150 miles, the 36th was pulled off the line, given refresher amphibious training, and on August 14th of 1944, it helped to spearhead the invasion of southern France, the other D-Day. Alongside the 3rd and the 45th Infantry Divisions, it fought its way up the Rhone River Valley, pierced the Vosges Mountains, helped to contain the Colmar Pocket, and eventually fought its way through the Siegfried Line in March of 1945 to enter southern Germany, where it liberated the Landsberg concentration camp before entering Austria at the end of the war. Only 5 divisions in the United States Army saw more casualties than the 36th Infantry Division did during World War II. So the men who wore the T-patch paid a very high price for the glory that they gained during that conflict. And of course, what our veterans went through in World War II is symbolic of what all of our veterans have gone through for us in all of our conflicts. So by looking at this particular moment in history, we can remind ourselves of their service and their sacrifice. So we're going to do that today by talking to you about uniforms, weapons, vehicles, equipment, and tactics, both American and German. We're going to begin here by talking about the Standard American Rifle Squad. The Standard American Rifle Squad is what you see here in front of me, or rather in front of you, behind me. They're wearing the wool combat uniform. This is the standard uniform of the American GI in the European theater of World War II. At the beginning of the war, through the end of the war, that 12-man squad was armed with a variety of weapons, which we're going to talk to you about. But those two weapons are the M1 Garand rifle and the Browning automatic rifle. And each one of those weapons was integral to the squad. And at the middle part of the war, we began to divide the squad into 4-man fire teams based around the Browning automatic rifle. And so what we want to do for you now is we want to talk to you about those weapons. And we're going to start by dividing up into our fire teams, and then we're going to bring out the M1 Garand.
Good afternoon. This is the M1 Garand rifle. It's a gas-operated, air-cooled, semi-automatic rifle, chambered in .30-06 Springfield and fed by an 8-round in-block clip. It's the first standard-issue semi-automatic weapon. It was issued, first saw service in 1936 when it superseded the slower bolt-action Springfield 1903 rifle. Now, to load the weapon, you take the 8-round in-block clip and you insert it into the internal magazine. And when thumb pressure is released from the top round, the bolt will snap forward automatically, chambering around. And this is a semi-automatic weapon. That means that the operator can send a round downrange every time he chooses to squeeze the trigger. Now, as you can imagine, that provided a very distinct speed advantage over the slower bolt-action rifles in use by the Axis powers at the time. When the final round is expended, the in-block clip is going to audibly eject with a pinging noise. And that gave rise to the phrase, to ping out. And that was a cue to the user at the time, who could possibly be disoriented or frightened, that it was a really good time to reload that weapon. So this is the M1 Garand rifle, once described by General George Patton as the finest fighting implement ever devised by man. Would you please demonstrate your weapon? Thank you very much.
In a 12-man rifle squad at the beginning of World War II, 11 men would carry the M1 Garand, and the 12th man would carry the weapon that we're going to bring forward now, the Browning automatic rifle. This weapon became so important to the GI that by the middle part of the war, we put 3 BARs in every 12-man rifle squad. And to talk to you about this favorite of all GI weapons, we're going to give you Private First Class Tad Druar.
Thank you, Captain. This is the 1918 A2 Browning automatic rifle, more affectionately known as the BAR. Fully configured with the bipod handle, it weighs approximately 22 pounds. However, oftentimes the soldiers would get rid of the handle and the bipod, making it a little bit lighter, easier to carry through the woods and the brush. The BAR fires a same 30-06 as the M1 Garand, fires it out of a 20-round magazine. The theoretical rate of fire for this gun is 500 to 650 rounds a minute. What that means is it eats ammunition. Because it eats ammunition, the gunner would carry 12 to 13 magazines, and he would have an assistant gunner with an additional 6 magazines. Also, if I were to go down wounded or killed, he would get rid of his M1 Garand and take on the Browning automatic rifle. Now, the Browning automatic rifle has an effective range of about 1,500 yards. What that means is if I see an enemy soldier about 15 football fields away, I could kill him. The Browning automatic rifle also has 2 speeds, fast and very fast. I'll now demonstrate. The Browning automatic rifle.
So those 2 weapons, the M1 Garand and the Browning automatic rifle, were the standard weapons issued to the GI, the American Rifle Squad, and for both the Army and the Marine Corps in World War II and during the Korean conflict. Now, this is what an American squad looks like, and this is what an American squad is armed like. It pays for us to also know what our enemy is doing, how he is armed and how he is organized. So we're going to switch out our GIs, and we're going to bring to you a German rifle squad. And courtesy of the Wehrmacht, we're going to have a demonstration of their weapons and capabilities. Squad dismissed.
The German Army in World War II started out with the same 12-man squad that you just heard about that the American infantry had. In this squad, you had a light machine gun, an NCO with a submachine gun, and everybody else was carrying a bolt-action rifle. By the end of the war, those squads were often made up of 2 belt-fed machine guns, a submachine gun, the other men carrying either rifles or some of the newly issued assault rifles that were capable of full automatic fire. First weapon that we're going to demonstrate will be the standard German infantry rifle. The German Army, as did most European armies of the world, started out with a 5-shot bolt-action rifle. This is the Mauser K98 carbine. It fired the 7.92 millimeter rifle cartridge, fed from an internal 5-round box magazine. It had an effective range out to about 600 yards and was issued throughout the entire war. It was a very effective rifle. The comparable thing in the American Army was the .03 Springfield rifle. If you would, demonstrate your weapon. That was the standard German infantry rifle throughout the entire war. The next weapon that we're going to talk with you about is a weapon that was designed after the Russian front opened up and the Germans came into contact with the Russian army, which had the Tokarev semi-automatic rifle. So the Germans developed the weapon we're showing to you now, the K-43. This weapon fires the same 7.92 millimeter rifle cartridge as the Mauser. It's fired from a 10-round detachable box magazine, has an effective range out to about 600 yards, just like the rifle. But these weapons were equipped with a scope rail so that you could put a 4-power scope on it and use it either as a sniper rifle or the squad sharpshooter rifle. If you would, demonstrate your weapon. This weapon was never introduced in the quantity that was necessary to replace all of the bolt-action rifles, but there were a large number of them issued out to the infantry squads. Displaced. Now, we'll turn you back over to Captain Hunt.
So those were the standard weapons issued to the standard infantrymen in both the German and the American rifle squads. However, those were not the only weapons that were on the battlefield during World War II. There was another class that was very popular, became very well known, and those are the weapons that we are bringing out now. That class of weapons is known as the submachine gun. So we're going to bring out the American and German submachine guns. The standard American submachine gun in World War II was the Thompson submachine gun, which of course became very famous during the gangster era of the 1930s. This weapon was not a standard issue infantry weapon. In a 15,000-man Army infantry division, there were only supposed to be 237 Thompson submachine guns. This was a weapon that was intended for specialists. This was a weapon that was there for MPs, commandos, rangers, those kinds of units. Paratroopers tended to get a lot more of them than your standard infantry squad, and the reasons for that are several. First off, this is a very heavy weapon. It weighs 11 pounds compared to an M1 Garand, which weighs only 9.5 pounds. Additionally, unlike the BAR and the M1 Garand that both fire the 30-06 caliber ammunition, this fires a 45 caliber pistol ammunition. So you cannot interchange ammunition between the standard weapons of the squad and this Thompson. That complicates your supply picture. But perhaps the biggest drawback to the Thompson is its effective range. An M1 Garand has an effective range of about 500 yards. A Thompson has an effective range of 105 yards. So if most German weapons can shoot 5, 6, 7, 800 yards, and that Thompson can only shoot 105 yards, you're on the wrong end of that mathematical equation. However, there were advantages to the Thompson as well. It fired from a 30 or 20 round stick magazine that inserts into the bottom of the weapon, so you have a lot of ammunition capacity. GIs always like having more bullets. And of course, this is a fully automatic weapon. So it has a very high rate of fire. Now, the cyclic rate of fire on this weapon is between 500 and 600 rounds a minute. When we say cyclic rate of fire, though, what we're talking about is theoretical rate of fire. That is, if we could ignore all of the laws of physics and we had a bottomless magazine of ammunition, you could theoretically shoot 500 or 600 rounds a minute. Of course, on a real battlefield, you do not have a bottomless magazine of ammunition. You got to reload after every 20 or 30 rounds, and you also don't get to ignore the laws of physics. So if you fired this weapon too fast, it would overheat. When it overheats, it malfunctions, and a weapon that stops working on the battlefield is a really bad thing. So the typical rate of fire here is about 80 to 100 rounds a minute. That's still a very fast rate of fire, and obviously having more bullets and being able to shoot them faster is something that's apt to maybe keep you alive on the battlefield. Additionally, this is the ideal weapon for certain combat situations. So if you're fighting in dense wood or jungle when the range is apt to be very compressed, if you're fighting street to street or room to room or house to house, this is the kind of weapon that you want. One of these was issued to the crew of every armored vehicle so that they could have some close-in protection when they bivouacked at night or when they were doing maintenance or something like that. There were GIs who really liked this thing. They would manage to get a hold of one and keep it supplied. A lot of guys watched for the first burned-out tank they saw on the battlefield to run over and steal the Thompson out of it if it had been left behind. So there were men who sought this weapon out. You would see them on the battlefield. You just wouldn't see a lot of them on the battlefield typically. This was a weapon, of course, that Hollywood simply fell in love with because, well, it looks really cool, it shoots really fast, and it has a very dramatic muzzle flash. If you watch a lot of old World War II movies, you could be forgiven for getting the idea that every other GI carried one of these things. In fact, they're a lot more rare than that, but they were there, and we're going to show you what this weapon looked like. Demonstrate your piece. So it's easy to see why this weapon was very popular. It's also easy to see why you didn't want to stand on the right side of it, because it throws that brass a really good distance, and that brass is very, very hot if it goes down the neck of your shirt. So you always wanted to be behind the guy with the automatic weapon. If the Americans had submachine guns, you can count on the fact that the Germans have submachine guns as well. And to talk about their version of this weapon, we're going to turn you back over to Sergeant Preston.
The German equivalent was the MP40, often referred to in movies as a Schmeiser, although that's incorrect. This weapon fires the 9mm pistol cartridge, same cartridge as a Luger or a P38. It's fed from a 32-round box magazine. It has a theoretical rate of fire of about 450 rounds per minute. And in this configuration, it's got an effective range out to about 100 yards. However, if you want to increase that, you unfold the collapsible buttstock, and you can increase your effective range in this configuration out to about 200 yards. This weapon was originally created to equip paratroopers and armored vehicle crewmen, but it immediately became apparent that it would be useful in the infantry squad. So the squad leader in the infantry squad would generally be issued one of these so that he would have a little bit of automatic firepower available for his use. Now I will demonstrate the MP40 for you. That's the German equivalent of the submachine gun. And now back to Captain Hunt.
In addition to the submachine guns, there were crew-served weapons on the battlefield. In World War II, the United States Army was built on something called the triangular division. That meant that everything came in threes. So in infantry division, you had 3 regiments. Each regiment had 3 battalions. Each battalion had 3 companies. They had 3 platoons that had 3 squads. As a captain, I would be in command of a 186-man infantry company, which would consist of 3 rifle platoons and 1 weapons platoon. That weapons platoon would be armed with 60mm mortars and the weapon that you've just seen come out in front of you, the light machine gun. The American light machine gun is the Browning 1919 A4 machine gun. It is a crew-served weapon. What that means is that it takes more than 1 man to properly move and operate the piece. In the American case, you have a 4-man machine gun squad that will be commanded by a corporal. The corporal is the gunner. He's raising his hand. He has an assistant gunner who's raising his hand, and then he has 2 ammo bearers who are raising their hand. Each of the ammo bearers and the assistant gunner, and the gunner carries 1 can of 250 rounds of linked 30-06 ammunition. Notice I said 30-06. This uses the same ammunition as the M1 Garand or the BAR, so those weapons can interchange ammo. It greatly simplifies your supply picture when you have most weapons using the same ammunition. The the ammo bearers also carry their own M1 Garand rifles, so they have two jobs. One is to tote ammo for the machine gun. The other is to protect the machine gun. So the machine gun is moving, when it's being set up, when it's being displaced, or if it should malfunction, they are there to use their rifle fire to protect the gunner and the assistant gunner. The assistant gunner carries the 24-pound machine gun. The gunner carries the 14-pound tripod. Now that might sound backwards. The assistant gunner carries the gun, and the gunner carries the tripod, but this actually makes a lot of sense because the most important decision the machine gun squad leader is going to make is to choose where that gun is going to operate. So wherever he puts down that tripod, that's the spot. He selects it, the assistant gunner puts the machine gun into the tripod, then he moves off to the side to load the gun while the gunner gets behind the piece in order to operate it. This weapon has a cyclic rate of fire of about 1,200 rounds per minute. Now remember, cyclic rate of fire is theoretical. If you shot that fast, you would burn the weapon out and it would become useless. So the operational, sustainable rate of fire here is about 400 to 450 rounds a minute, which is still pretty fast. Good gunners were taught to fire in 8 to 10 round bursts, traversing the weapon left and right as they did so. That would still put a lot of fire out toward the enemy, and in an emergency you could increase that rate of fire for very brief periods of time without malfunctioning the weapon. You want to be really careful not to overheat this thing because it takes 5 minutes with a pair of asbestos gloves to change barrels on a 1919, and 5 minutes is forever on a battlefield. This weapon is very easy to move around. It is easy to dig in. It's easy to camouflage. We use these everywhere. The infantry got them. They put them in aircraft. They put them in armored vehicles. They put them on warships. It was ubiquitous in the United States military during World War II. And we're going to let you see what this thing looks like in operation. So earplugs and whatnot. Demonstrate your weapon. Notice the rat-a-tat-tat sound of American automatic weapons. The Thompson, the BAR, this 1919, they all have that sort of chug, 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 chug sound. That's a very important thing to recognize. German weapons sound very different than American weapons. And this is something that a GI, after just a day in combat, would recognize and remember for the rest of his life. That's important because on the battlefield, you usually don't see the enemy. He's hundreds of yards away. He's using cover and concealment just like you're using cover and concealment. So typically you're shooting at his muzzle flash, or you're shooting at where you think he is, or you're shooting at the sound of his weaponry. And he's doing the same thing. So unlike in the movies where, the hero picks up the enemy weapon and uses it all the time, on a real battlefield you would do that only under the most extreme duress, because if you're using an enemy weapon, you sound like the enemy and your guys are going to shoot at you. Want to avoid that. For the American Rifle Company, the machine gun was a support weapon. It was supposed to provide a base of fire which allowed the infantry with their rifles to maneuver, to engage, and destroy the enemy. The German philosophy is very different, and the German machine gun is very different. And to talk to you about those differences, I give you back again to Sergeant Gressman.
The German light machine gun in the bipod configuration that we're going to talk to you about is the MG42. This was a mid-war development after starting the war with the MG34, which was a highly machined, precise-made weapon. The Germans needed something that they could produce that was cheaper to manufacture, so they created one out of stamped parts with a little bit of welding and a lot cheaper to produce in mass quantities. Now, the German concept for a machine gun was that the machine gun was the killing weapon of the squad. The squad riflemen were there to support the machine gun, but it was the machine gun that was designed to kill the enemy. Your squad leader commanded the machine gun, he put it into place, told it where to fire, how much, when to engage, and all that sort of thing, and the riflemen carried ammunition and supported the machine gun, protected it, etc. Now, at the beginning of the war, the MG34 was a machine gun capable of both semi-automatic and fully automatic fire. It was belt-fed, fires the same 7.92 millimeter rifle cartridge as a standard German infantry rifle. It had a theoretical rate of fire of about 900 rounds per minute. That's about twice what the 1917 had. As they went along and developed the MG42, they figured they needed to increase that firepower, so the MG42 had a theoretical rate of fire of 1,200 rounds per minute. It actually wasn't real popular with the infantry squad because everybody carried ammo to feed that thing, because it fired it really, really fast. Now, in order to be able to maintain that kind of rate of fire, you have to have the ability to change a hot barrel. The barrel change on the MG42 will take an experienced gunner about 4 or 5 seconds. He slams the lever on the side of the barrel, pulls the old barrel out onto the ground, throws in a cold one, slams it shut, and he's ready to go back into action. Every gunner was issued with multiple barrels. He could have them laid out there beside him. These are cooling off while he's heating this one up, and he's just cycling through this. In the bipod configuration, it's got an effective range out to about 600, 800 yards. You put this on the German tripod, and you can increase that effective range out to about 3,000 yards. And with the optical sights and some of the other features on the tripod, the gunner can actually arrange for a beaten zone of fire downrange that's pre-programmed onto an automatic mechanism on the tripod, where if his squad leader tells him, I need fire in your fire zone down there now, all he has to do is reach over there and pull the trigger. He doesn't have to sight anything because it's all preset, and the gun would automatically traverse and elevate to fill that beaten zone downrange automatically. It was a very, very effective tripod for this weapon, but we're going to show it to you now in the bipod light machine gun configuration. Demonstrate your weapon. Sounds a little different, doesn't it? Those are the infantry squad's light machine guns. Machine gun teams, display.
Obviously, the small arms, the machine guns carried by the infantry are incredibly lethal. The machine gun, which came to prominence in World War I, created a tactical problem when combined with artillery, barbed wire, and entrenchments that could not be solved until the invention of the next class of weapon that we're going to talk about. The answer to the machine gun is the armored fighting vehicle. The Americans called them tanks, the Germans called them panzers. And to talk about the American main battle tank in World War II, I'm going to turn you over to my executive officer, Lieutenant Gil Easton.
Behind me here is the M4A3 Sherman tank, the infantryman's best friend on the battlefield. This Sherman tank weighs 30 tons. She's 26 miles an hour. She has 4.5 inches of armor in the front, 2.5 inches armor around. She's a great weapon to have on the battlefield. There were most Sherman tanks went into battle with either a 76 millimeter gun, a 75 millimeter gun, but this is a special Sherman. This Sherman is carrying a 105 millimeter gun. And we're going to let you hear it right now. Now, that's the kind of firepower that 105 would bring to knock out these pillboxes right behind you. Sherman tanks during the war. The Germans only made 21,000 tanks of all types. Every battalion commander would have 3 of those at his disposal to take out those pillboxes and those machine gun nests. The Sherman tank, it would give you a nice edge on a battlefield. To tell you what the Germans are bringing into the battlefield, we have Sergeant Mike Maloney.
Right here, ladies and gentlemen, we happen to have what is known as the Jagdpanzer 38, or better known as the 38T Hetzer. This was a tank destroyer, or in the true translation of Jagdpanzer, hunting tank. This is not an actual tank like the Sherman that just exited the field. This is a vehicle designed to hunt the Sherman. Notice the height. It is just under 6 feet tall. Crew is 4 men. It is very tight and cramped on the inside. Basically, one man is sitting. The man right behind him, his knees is in his back. It has an ammunition capacity of 41 rounds before that vehicle has to be resupplied on ammunition. The main gun is a 75 millimeter L48 gun. It is a gasoline engine, top speed 25 miles an hour. With that 75, and due to the height, it was excellent to hide into the hedgerow countries where bushes were generally about 6 feet in height. So you can see how this was excellent in hiding. Hence, part of the name, and there's still controversy, the Hetzer, or to bait, or the baiter. We will let you hear the 75 L48 at this time. That's the 75.
One thing that armored warfare isn't is quiet. Tanks do not sneak up on anybody. You generally know that they're coming. And for an infantryman, that is a distinctly unpleasant feeling to hear those engines, to feel the ground rumble and know that enemy armor is coming after you. And all that you've got to protect yourself is a wool shirt and the hole that you've dug in the ground. A rifle or machine gun is going to have no impact on a tank or a tank destroyer whatsoever. And usually, your own tanks and anti-tank guns are never where you need them to be when you really need them to be there. And that means that the infantry has a distinct disadvantage against armor. The American Army recognized that early in World War II and it developed a weapon to allow the infantry to tackle enemy armor. And that weapon is the one that's here behind me. This is the Mark I bazooka, named after a comedian's faux musical instrument that he used in a famous vaudeville show. It looked like just a long steel pipe, and thus you can see the resemblance. This is actually a rocket launcher. This is the first handheld anti-tank weapon ever to be issued to troops on a battlefield in history. It is a crew-served weapon. It has 2 men. It has the gunner who carries the bazooka, and it has the assistant gunner who carries a bag of rockets. This has 2 types of ammunition. This has an anti-tank rocket, and it has a high explosive rocket. To load it, very simple. The gunner would take one of the rockets out of the bag. He would insert it into the back of the bazooka, and he would uncoil from the back of the rocket 2 electrical leads that he would attach to posts on the back of the bazooka. Those posts were hardwired to a battery-operated trigger in the handle of the bazooka, and when that trigger was squeezed, the electrical charge from the battery would follow to the leads, ignite the rocket, fire the weapon. This has a very simple iron sight, 100, 200, or 300 yards. That was the maximum range of a bazooka. When these first showed up on the battlefields of Tunisia in North Africa in mid-1943, these were a huge shock to the Germans. They had never seen infantrymen being given a weapon that could destroy a tank. And at that point in the war, the bazooka would knock out almost any German tank. But over the course of the war, the German tanks got bigger and more heavily armed, and the bazooka could not defeat their armor. However, a good bazooka team knew you don't have to penetrate the armor. What a good bazooka team is going to do is kind of fire at the track and disable the vehicle, or it's going to try and get around behind the tank and fire into its engine compartment to disable it. And a tank that cannot move is a sitting duck on the battlefield, and its crew is going to abandon it. It's no longer a threat to you. The bazooka, however, could be used against something other than tanks. You could use them against buildings, you could use them against fortified positions and pillboxes. They were pretty good bunker busters. And we're going to show you the bazooka in that utilitarian function now. So we're going to send our bazooka team out. They're going to fire their high explosive rocket at this pillbox that you see right out here in front of you. Bazooka team, demonstrate your weapon. So the idea of the bazooka, of course, was to be able to give the infantry essentially its own kind of artillery. They could move around. The Germans would capture bazookas, replicate them, improve upon them, eventually come up with something called the Panzerfaust, which is the grandfather of the current day rocket-propelled grenade. So with the bazooka, the infantry has the ability to kill tanks. And what does that mean? It means the tank cannot roam over the battlefield impervious to the infantry anymore. The tank now needs to have help, and that help is the infantry. The infantry is going to be on the ground to protect it from guys carrying bazookas, ones that work anyway. And that means that the infantry has to have the ability to keep up with the tanks. And to explain how that was done, I turn you back over to Lieutenant Easton.
Like I said before, the infantry is very happy to have that Sherman tank right with us to go fight these pillboxes and machine gun nests and everything else we're going to see with the Germans. But like the captain said, the Germans have a way to knock out our tanks. So the tanks are real happy to see the infantry with them because we keep the German infantry away from the tanks. But that Sherman tank goes 26 miles an hour. Well, we have a vehicle right here, the M4A1 half-track. It travels 45 miles an hour. It will hold an entire squad. It has armor on it, about a half-inch all the way around. It has a machine gun on it. It will hold 12-man squad. And it's a great piece of equipment because we help protect the tank. The tank does the job for us. We protect the tank. We defeat the Germans. We get to go home sooner. I'm going to show you that half-track moving right along. Looks like it's not quite 45 miles an hour, but she'll get up there. And I'll give you back now to Captain Hunt. Thank you.
So now that you can see it's going to take a lot of teamwork to be effective on the battlefield. It's going to take the infantry weapons, it's going to take the supporting weapons, it's going to take the armor, it's going to take the half-tracks, it's going to take the anti-tank weapons. But all of that, at the end of the day, is designed to do one thing. And that's to get the attacking infantry close enough to his enemy to take and hold ground. And when you get close, it doesn't matter if your weapon shoots 100 yards or it shoots 500 yards. When you get close, you need a different type of weapon system in order to help you achieve your mission. And one of the most effective weapons at close-in combat is, well, so one of the most famous, one of the most recognizable weapons of World War II, the weapon that we're bringing out now, and that is the Mark II fragmentation grenade. These things, almost everybody's seen one of them, and how many of you have watched John Wayne, Chuck Norris, Arnold Schwarzenegger pull this ring out with his teeth, throw this thing 300 yards, and blow the enemy out of a tree in a small atomic explosion? Yeah, we've all seen that movie, right? Unfortunately, Hollywood is not reality. This ring is connected to a cotter pin that stretches through the head and the spoon of the grenade. Cotter pin is bent on the other side. It is your safety device. It does not come out easily. If you tried to pull this ring out with your teeth, the ring would stay in place, the teeth would come out. That's why they're a dentist in the medical corps, to deal with the people who imagine that they're John Wayne. You don't want this ring to come out easily, because if I got this on my web gear and we're walking through the woods and a vine grabs that ring, pulls it out, this falls between my legs, 5 seconds later I get what's called the negative entry in my health record. That ring is very important. You've got to understand how to use your weapon. You want to take the spoon, which is spring-loaded, put it in the palm of your hand and squeeze very tight. Then you prime the cotter pin by bending the ear straight. You put your finger in the ring and you pull that cotter pin out. Once you do that, the only thing that holds this spring-loaded spoon in place is the pressure of your hand. When that pressure is released, the spoon jumps off the grenade, striking an igniter and lighting a 5-second fuse. 5 seconds later, this thing is going to blow up. And there's nothing in the world that's going to stop it. When it explodes, each one of these squares that gives this thing its distinctive shape and its nickname, the pineapple grenade, each one of those squares is supposed to become a fragment, whirling through the air at flesh-ripping, man-killing velocity. You've got 5 seconds before it explodes. You hold it for 3 seconds before you throw it. You count 1001, 1002, 1003, because if you throw this right away, your enemy is going to have time to pick it up and throw it back at you. So the whole time you're standing there holding this lit and smoldering grenade, you're hoping and praying like crazy that the person who worked the graveyard shift at that defense plant back in the States 5 months ago was paying attention that night, not hungover, and cut you a 5 and not a 4 or a 3-second fuse. If everything works right, after 3 seconds, you lob the grenade. You do not throw this like a baseball. It weighs about 3 pounds. You try and throw this like a baseball, it's going to go about 10 yards, and we're going to type negative entry in your health record. So you use your left arm as an aiming stake, and you throw this like a shot put. If you're fighting in the woods of the jungle, you don't even lob it. You pitch it underhand like a softball. Try any other method, and I will guarantee you, even if there's only one significant sized tree within 20 yards of you, you'll manage to hit it, and this will come bouncing back in your direction. The average GI or Marine can lob this thing about 30 yards. It has a blast radius of 25 yards. So you throw it and duck. It's potentially as dangerous to you as it is to your enemy. But if your opponent is around a corner, in a building, if you can get it into the gun port of the pillbox, you can toss it into an armored vehicle, this is going to do exceptionally good service. The one thing that it's not going to do is it's not going to blow the turret off a tank, it's not going to collapse a building, and it won't create even a small mushroom cloud. We're going to show you what a grenade looks like on a real battlefield. So if you look out there, we have Private Shane Myers, who's going to toss his grenade into that shell hole in front of him. Demonstrate your weapon. So you can see no big pyrotechnic effect there. However, if the enemy was anywhere close to that, he's just had a really bad day. And so this weapon is a very effective tool for close-in fighting. So now you have some idea of the organization and the weaponry and the support systems for the infantrymen, both German and American, on a World War II battlefield. Now we're going to put all of those things together and show you how they work in unison to provide for the American Army victory in World War II. Remember that the American Army in World War II is an army that is on the offensive. Most of the time we are moving forward trying to take ground. The Germans, one of the best armies in the world, is now on the defensive. They're trying to hold ground, and that means the enemy usually got to select when and where the fighting was going to take place. And he selected positions that were of great benefit to him. And so what you see here behind me is sort of a typical German defensive zone. Barbed wire obstacles in front to slow the infantry down, get it caught up within the field of fire of their small arms. You have the trench and several concrete pillboxes over here that would provide protection for their machine guns. The infantry would be in the trench. On the far side, you see that German Hetzer, that tank destroyer, in a hold-down position behind a berm so that it's even harder to see. And in front of all of this is a great big open field. And we have to cross that open field to get at the enemy here. So he has the maximum ability to inflict damage on us as we cross that open ground. The only way we're going to cross that open ground is to have the support of armor and artillery in order to allow the infantry to get close so that it can use its small arms and things like grenades to get in and overrun that enemy position. So what we're about to demonstrate for you is a tactic that was incredibly effective on the World War II battlefield, albeit effective at the price of significant casualties. The weapons, the vehicles, and the tactics that you're about to see demonstrated are those that were used on the battlefield of World War II by American and German armed forces. And we're going to do everything we can to make this as realistic for you as possible. The weapons are from World War II, the vehicles are from World War II, the tactics are from World War II. However, there are some differences here. First off, we are not throwing real lead through the air. That's a very important difference because it means we can be a lot more heroic doing this than we would be in real life. The other thing, of course, that's going to be different from reality is that these weapons are striking from much greater distances than we have available to us. So actually, we could be sitting over here at 35th Street and shooting at each other if the enemy is over here on the other side of the entire post. And so, that we can't do that. You wouldn't be able to see everything. So we're going to bring it all in close for you. We're going to do it all out in the open so that you can see it. And we're going to be more above ground and visible than we would be in real life, because in real life the only safe place to be is in a hole in the ground or on your belly. But other than that, we're going to try and make this realistic.